Alright, so as some of us may know, metaphysics is the study of being. What does it mean for something to exist? What does existence entail? And essentially, we want to have a deeper understanding of reality. And so, Henri Bergson, while still maintaining the concept of metaphysics, wants us to kind of emphasize something that we often neglect when it comes to understanding reality, which is essentially time. Much of the time, whenever we are studying a certain object or something we're interested in, whether it's a conscious state, an experience of being somewhere, or even an inanimate object, they're all experiencing change. And these things are not the same thing at two different moments. Much of the information from this video is coming from this book, Henri Bergson's An Introduction to Metaphysics. If we go back to ancient times to Heraclitus, he had this famous saying, which is, no one could step into the same river twice. And this is obvious for us because water is always flowing in a river, and thus you can never have the same contact with the river twice. And this kind of concept actually generalizes to all the things of reality. Everything is changed. Nothing is the exact same at two different times. Let's say a rock. It may look like the most obviously static thing in the world to us, but if we were truly to think deeply about it, there may be small chemical reactions going inside the rock, maybe small expansions due to the temperature or erosion. Now, to kind of understand true reality in the eyes of Henri Bergson, he gives us the example of a color spectrum. Let's say our consciousness is a certain point going through the color spectrum. Consciousness and experience is always moving, it's always changing throughout time, so consciousness is always going to move throughout the color spectrum, and as we're going through the color spectrum, we see different colors. Let's also take into account the path of our consciousness throughout this spectrum of colors. If we were to point out a certain moment within our experience, this experience isn't fully limited to the immediate things that are present in the experience, but it's also going to be influenced by all the previous experiences that we considered. The experience of seeing blue isn't going to be the same as experiencing red, orange, yellow, green right before blue, because it gives us a different feeling, a different kind of experience, if that makes sense. It's currently unfolding, and each unfolding is influenced by the past experiences. And so that kind of is what reality is. Things are gradual change. Things are not just instants that we just mush together. And this is what Henri Bergson wanted to emphasize. It's a human tendency for us to neglect the idea of time because while our mind is trying to grasp reality, we only think as far as what is practical for us human beings. Sometimes considering the change that a metaphysical object undergoes is in a way uninteresting to us. But Henri Bergson says that we can sometimes run into problems if we neglect that time is a big part of the reality of something we're interested in. When we're studying a certain metaphysical entity, we sometimes use concepts and abstractions and relating certain objects to other objects that we know in order for us to understand it and communicate these ideas. And while this is good for us and practical for us, we still cannot say we've fully grasped the true reality of something we're interested in. So what are we to do if we want to fully understand the reality of something, taking into account its change in time, its variability? Well, in order to do that, we have to use something called intuition. Now, before we get into the idea of intuition, let's actually first talk about why sometimes using abstractions and concepts can be potentially bad for us human beings. Let's say, for example, even a character in a book. The author would point out a bunch of different characteristics and actions that the character has done. When we mush these together, we may think that we have a deep understanding of the character, but it's not an absolute understanding of the character. Placing ourselves in the shoes of the character, experiencing what the character experiences in the story, is an overall different experience and understanding as to if we were to just take a bunch of concepts and mush them together We can also say that conceptualizing may neglect the idea of movement. Let's say a rubber ball is moving, but we want to understand it in terms of concepts. If we want to do that, maybe we'll take a bunch of different snapshots of this ball rolling, try to account for movement by taking multiple snapshots, and maybe even go to infinity, making an infinite amount of snapshots. In the end, we will never actually grasp the idea of movement, for we're only taking instants, mushing them together, and these things aren't necessarily going to perfectly exemplify movement. Another reason why concepts will not give us the full reality is, let's take any object, let's say this green marker. Let's say we want to come up with a bunch of different concepts. It's green, it's made by a brand called Crayola, but maybe there's someone else who has a different experience of this marker. Let's say he first takes into account, oh, it adds color to a piece of paper. It's 10 centimeters long. And so using concepts can emphasize a certain characteristic of something that could potentially be overgeneralized and steer us away from other concepts and realities of this marker that we may not consider. And so Henri Bergson would say this is kind of why metaphysics has kind of split and diverged in a way, bringing about different disciplines. Let's talk about empiricism, rationalism, idealism, and realism, for example. There shouldn't be these divergent methods of understanding, but one overlying understanding that gives us the true grasp of reality. And so that's another example as to why concepts and symbols are not always the perfect way of fully grasping a reality. So what's the fix for this? Well, it's intuition. Intuition is kind of sympathizing with reality. If we want to fully grasp a certain reality, what's taking place in something we're interested in, we have to kind of experience time as that object. The experience of a rock. What is the rock experiencing throughout time? And this could be analogous to putting ourselves in the shoes of a certain character in a book, or allowing ourselves to experience a conscious state that we're interested in. By doing these things, we can better understand certain realities. Now, what is the most available experience of change and time but our own minds? We're experiencing time at this current moment by using our own intuition, our own experience of time, and sympathizing with the experience of time of another object, another metaphysical object. By combining those two experiences, our experience of time with theirs, we can have a better understanding of that metaphysical object of study and thus have a deeper understanding of that reality. Doing this allows us to understand the change, how things are gradual, and how the unfolding moments that are currently happening are also influenced by the previous experiences that the metaphysical object has went through. And so to Henri Bergson, this intuition is absolutely necessary for us to actually perform effective metaphysics. If metaphysics is a study of reality, we have to use our intuition if we want to fully grasp reality, where intuition is going to help us have a deep understanding of reality. And so true metaphysics is, in a way, effective intuition. So why is this important? For all we know, maybe understanding the change of a rock or an inanimate object might not even be interesting to us in the first place. So why bother? Well, Henri Bergson talks about the connection between science and metaphysics, where, as we said, metaphysics is the study of reality. Science is kind of the understanding of reality using symbols and relations. So let's say we look at a certain object, we're interested in it, and we study it. We will talk about a bunch of different concepts, which is our human tendency to do that because concepts are useful for us. If science were to solely rely on concepts, that is where the problem may show up. Let's talk about psychology. If we're trying to fully understand a mental state, we cannot just take multiple different facts and snapshots of a certain mental state, mush them together, and say we have fully grasped the mental state. What could fully help us grasp the true reality of a mental state than actually experiencing that mental state for ourselves? And so that's one example as to why science sometimes needs effective metaphysics and its use of intuition in order to actually make the concepts that makes it effective in the first place. And so that's kind of how metaphysics can help science, but at the same time, science can help metaphysics. Concepts can actually be very, very helpful to us. If we want to understand the reality of, let's go back to that rock. If we don't understand the idea of erosion or the expansion of atomic lattices or how temperature can make expansion, if we don't understand these things, intuition cannot necessarily lead us to an understanding of these certain changes if we don't know these concepts in the first place. In the end, what we want to experience is something that goes beyond these concepts. They serve as a good foundation of getting to understand these realities, but essentially intuition is trying to go beyond these concepts. That's how science can actually be helpful for metaphysics. By combining science and metaphysics, it can kind of lead to effective development and advancements in science and metaphysics. While humans have the tendency to use concepts and abstractions, this is the reason as to why solely relying on concepts and abstractions isn't going to be the best way for us to fully grasp a certain reality. Now, I will say that Henri Bergson did say that it's a very violent effort to perform intuition, and it's not an easy thing, and in fact it goes beyond our human tendency to use concepts, and so this is not necessarily an easy thing. But maybe by diving into Henri Bergson a bit more, I may fully understand what his ideas are in terms of intuition and how it can truly guide us towards the absolute reality of something. And so thank you guys for watching, and maybe I'll see you in the next one. Bye. My goodness.